Good morning, friends. Welcome to another Word of God, OBEJournal 2019, number 19. We're really stacking them up, aren't we? And I hope your explorations continue apace, and that there is something every other day to engage your curiosity and your sense of wonderment. As we move into greater and greater degrees of multidimensionality and explore the reaches of our consciousness as it applies itself to our thoughts and emotions and explorations. I have been, it's more than forming a theory, that's for sure, but you might call it that. The ramifications of this new man that is evolving, that is emerging, new women too, of course, and it seems to result in the ability and the desire to recognize the whole spectrum of sentient beings that share at least this planet with us. It is, and it will be, quite easy to get overwhelmed with all of this. There are days when I get a little overwhelmed. So I suspect it will be happening to others if it isn't already. And I don't mean overwhelmed in terms of nervous breakdowns. I just mean coping with a lot of contacts. Now, you can certainly shut yourself down. You can dim your consciousness so that you don't have a lucid dream. Or if you do, you don't remember it. Or you just eliminate 3/4 of what's going on. Maybe, and that's what we're doing already. And we narrow this process of elimination. I think the most common thing that people would do would be to visit with deceased loved ones, one is asleep, and not recall it. And on some level, that lack of recall is an act of will, if you like. You have decided that somewhere you can't cope with that it's too exciting, too overwhelming, too releasing for your current state of consciousness. You're afraid of anything from crying to being laughed at or mocked in some way, and you wish to keep your status within the family and the community, and only share with other initiates. That's the first level, as far as I can tell, and it's very common. Lots of people do make out-of-body contact with deceased loved ones or other out-of-body floaters, explorers, and just eliminate that experience from their consciousness palette in order, they feel, to better cope with daily life. There's this sense that if you open up to that, then you will not be able to cope that well. And there's a sense of worry, a sense of, can I really handle that sort of thing? And that's something we have to overcome at some point before it overcomes us. Joking, of course. I'd say the next level, and this is less common because people don't really like to think about nature spirits that much. There is a community that studies it, experiences it, shares, and I would include the orb community in that too, because orbs do seem to be, amongst other things, nature spirits of one kind or another. And there's a whole spectrum of them, as you've no doubt picked up. Anything from the tiny little elementals, tiny little points of light that inhabit, that ensoul blades of grass. Some of our explorers have talked about this various times. Kurt Leyland, much earlier William Bloom, and others, of course. And they seem to be the smallest elementals that I have come across. But there's an elemental ensouling every nature form. Trees, of course, bushes. Flowers, of course. All forms of nature. And they have elementals that, as they learn their tasks, aside from their innate desire to play and have fun, they graduate to more complex forms, and they move all the way up, to landscapes, skies, mountain ranges, valleys, to what's called Deva. And we've discussed Devas many times and interacted with them. There are elementals in one's home. That's an old pagan belief. The Romans certainly were into it. I've had elementals in my home for years. I have a house angel. And I've joked around, he's a bit like the butler in Downton Abbey, organizing all the others. And they are quite dedicated to their task, and they like to be recognized and greeted in a respectful and friendly way. I've noticed over the years other elementals come in, just quite a few in the garden, and they have definitely directed me in my reconstruction of the garden over the past few years. And they had a plan in mind long before I could figure it out. And my recent video will show you a little bit of that plan, not the complete 9 yards, but we're on our way. And I didn't conceive of what the garden would be. I just wanted to plant some trees and shrubs. But I can see they had a plan all along, and it's slowly manifesting as some plants and shrubs grow more vigorously than others and kind of shut each other out, and dead branches appear that need to be cut off, and those dead branches, when they're gone, they create spaces that weren't there before, all sorts of things. And perhaps all gardeners find this out, and I'm still a bit of a newbie. But that's the elementals, that's the nature spirits doing what they do. Very well, I might add. And they don't use human intelligence, they use nature spirit intelligence. So they'll often do things that seem a little crazy, but just kind of let them, they know what they're up to. So, embracing the nature spirits on all levels. And I know you're saying, well, gee, Gord, that's a lot. I've got a busy life already. I know. And I don't know what to tell you. There's a lot of sentient beings in the universe on this planet, and if we wish to expand our consciousness, and I know all of you do, then we have to tackle this in some way or other. You have to confront it and see what you can do. Else you're not expanding. You're staying on a level. And of course, there's always times when you will be staying on a level before you climb up the next few steps to the next level. What is the other, or shall I say, another level of consciousness expansion? Well, interacting with extraterrestrial beings that are visiting. We've discussed that a little bit. Quite a few people these days are publishing their own little books through Amazon, I notice, on their interaction with different extraterrestrials in their ships, on their planets, moving around, getting friendly, learning to be on a level with these aliens rather than be, manipulated by them or feel manipulated and used. And there's been a slow coming together over the last, 30, 40 years. People don't seem quite so traumatized as they used to be. And that's a good thing, surely. And as we talk and interact with these extraterrestrial beings in promoting the values of peace and love and brotherhood, as Stephen Greer is always going on about, and rightly so, we will, I was going to say hopefully, I shouldn't say hopefully, bring greater harmony overall to the planet. Anything that reduces our levels of fear and anxiety is good. And there is a fear and anxiety over the, shall we say, government propaganda that is very negative about alien intentions. They tend to see them as enemies trying to control, manipulate, and destroy. And as most researchers will tell you, they're not. There are some that manipulate for their own ends, but I wouldn't say that they destroy anything particularly. Not us, not our way of life. Some of them are interested in integrating. All of them want to find out what we're all about and how we've managed to survive such intense, passionate, fighting mad evolution. And they're slowly coming to realize that the strength of our heart chakra and our adaptability, endless adaptability, is part of the game plan. That fighting to defend your turf with great passion opens and strengthens the heart chakra in the same way that struggling to feed and care for your children and family, extended family, it's the same. It's the same game. That creation destruction thing, it's not the paradox that it looks. Now, this is not to condone ruthless and cruel behavior that we see every day around the world if you follow any level of news. But it is to show how that creation destruction paradigm blends and gives us greater and greater measures of power, evolutionary, what's the word I'm looking for? Evolutionary understanding. Tolerance. mercy, forgiveness. I mean, certainly as I look at what went on in Syria and what's still going on, wasn't I reading just the other day about the Russians and the Syrians bombing hospitals and schools in Idlib still? And of course, there's always the propaganda of both sides, but it's undoubtedly going on. And this creates tons of karma for these people. They will be coming back in other lives and getting the dickens beaten out of them by some other people. This is not the end of karma, this is the middle. And if we come back, and as many of us will, in about 80 to 100 years, and there's another group of people getting flattened, you can be sure some of them will be reincarnated Russians and Syrians that are involved in this absolute decimation of the civilian population of Syria for the last, 5 years. There's no escaping this sort of thing, and it's a lesson to be learned. And if they're choosing the tough road to learn, then so be it. Let them do it. Now, this is not to say that they have to avoid corrective action and the pointed finger of the International Criminal Court and the machinations of all that sort of thing. But as I talk of all these wonderful positive developments in our evolutionary strategies to becoming, realizing our greater and greater selves, our timeless beings that are not confined to any one body or any one level of consciousness, but are completely free to roam through the whole the whole territory. There is that to consider. And I just offer up Syria as one example, because it's still going on, and the level of ruthless cruelty is stunning. It is stunning. There's no question in my mind it's anything other than oppressively horrible. And it doesn't take much reading to rediscover that, I can assure you. Again, we have that balance between creation and destruction. And it's quite easy to get focused on the destructive side and get very gloomy and depressed and disgusted, despairing, frightened. And it's very much the same with the environmental issues that we face. I notice people tend to get very troubled about that, even though they're, with the many points of view that there are, including the one that whatever we do is absolutely too late. The shelves of ice are melting at phenomenal rates, and if there's not a flood, there's a fire, and if there's not a fire, there's a tornado, and if there's not a tornado, there's just a regular old heat wave. And are there more heat waves than there used to be? It seems like there is. But it's a very big picture filled with many details, interpreted by many different experts in different ways. But it does cause a lot of despair and negativity, and there's no questioning that. And we have to cope with it one way or another. Extreme weather. There are ways to prepare. Every time there's a massive forest fire, I hear someone discussing improper or lazy forest management. And it's not been done through lack of willpower, lack of budgets. And I'm certainly not claiming to be any kind of an expert, but if you can't trash a nice big circle around your town so that there's no trees for half a mile, so that the fire doesn't spread over your town, well, this must be a reality for these communities, and I see this over and over again. We're just sort of hoping that the fire won't hit us, or the flood won't, get to our neighborhood. There's an awful lot of that, and we're going to have to do something about it. There's no question. Now, can we do enough to fend it off? I think so, but there's definitely an element of just coping, and but that's what we often do, isn't it? Where I live, we have terrible snow in the winter, and we just sort of cope with it. It's 8 feet high, and it's covered in ice, and you can't do anything with it, and it's dangerous to walk out the front door and try to get in your car because there's so much ice. And we just sort of cope with it winter to winter. And are we doing any better than we did 30, 40 years ago? I don't think so. But we're coping. And with all the other weather issues, that's what I see happening. But again, I don't claim to be any kind of an expert on this matter, just an observer. Now, this also raises the question of the contribution of ignorant and careless humans and our technologies to the global warming, climate change, extreme weather. We do have a contribution, there's no question, but there is other elements to consider. There's always a lot going on with Mother Nature that is entirely to do with Mother Nature, not really to do with us. And it's a factor of our arrogance to think that we're somehow in control of it. And we have to learn that we're not. No matter what we do, things will happen. What kind of cars we drive, although I'm certainly in favor of the electric cars and the non-polluting cars. And we will see that. We'll see a lot of it in the next 20 years, a lot of electric cars. Hopefully we'll also see the freeing up of the electrical grid so it doesn't cost so much to plug them in. And we will get that from alien technology that has already been back engineered and is being hidden by those who are slaves to economic forces and don't wish the electrical grid to be less valuable than it is now. But it will happen, there's no question. If you follow that issue, the development of technology from alien sources and where it's being hidden and stashed, and Stephen Greer talks about this sort of thing a lot, you'll see it's inevitable that it will be discovered by somebody. Somebody will leak it, and it'll get so simple to build that a couple of teenagers in their uncle's garage will figure it out, and we'll get it online before anyone's got time to get them. Young people are smart that way. Don't think that 15-year-olds haven't got this complex world of economic and political deception figured out. They have. And they know if they're developing something through their own smarts, they have to keep it quiet. They'll pass it around to their friends, and it will emerge at some point. I know it will. It'll be debunked and all the rest of it, but it will happen. So what do we have? The millions of dead people that are still as human as you and me and still functioning joyfully, creatively, spiritually, sorting out their issues on the lower astral. I should, when I talk about sorting out the issues on the lower astral, I should mention, without touching on any names, I am in contact with psychotherapists that function on the astral plane. And you've heard about dead doctors working on energy healing, using human channels to do that. And they love doing that sort of thing. And there's lots of them floating around the planet doing it, working with healers. Some of them have worked with me. And certainly lots of them work with people like WordofGord and the other more famous healers. But in terms of psychiatry and psychotherapy and stuff, souls arrive on the certain levels of the astral plane when they die, and they haven't resolved their psychological issues, their traumas and their scars and their wounds. So I have it on good authority from the one I've been communicating with that yes, there's lots of work to do there. There's lots of people need to sit down with a psychotherapist and do more or less what they do with a psychotherapist here on physical plane Earth. No lack of that. So recognizing the giant spectrum of consciousness on, let's say, the astral and mental planes, because it's filled with dead human beings, all of whom have the same, are working on the same, pretty much the same levels of consciousness that they were when they were here. You just take it with you. And if you were, just to give one example, sort of struggling out of a repressive religion, and many people are. I see memoirs about it all the time. And establishing yourself as an individual that isn't subject to the dictates and opinions and condemnations of a belief system that is cultish in some way or other, and that can take many years. I just saw a memoir by a lady who's fighting off that thing with the Jehovah's Witnesses, but there are many other sects, not just them. And if you're fighting that off and you're only halfway through your fight and you die, you're probably going to wind up on a level of the astral plane with family members and whatnot that still belong to that religion, and you're still going to have to fight it. You're still going to have to struggle to assert your individuality and your freedom of thought. So those things go on. And although we can do without food, learn to fly, and create your own home and all the interior design aspects of your own home with your mind on the astral plane, you can do all of that. It's great fun. There's still lots of issues to work on. Psychological, emotional, spiritual. And so recognize that that's all there. It doesn't suddenly get wiped away. Not at all. So extending one's consciousness there, extending one's consciousness to the extraterrestrial visitors, extending one's consciousness to the angels and devas, extending one's consciousness to the nature spirits, ensouling all forms of nature on all their levels, extending your consciousness to, well, even on the most basic level, human beings of other cultures and ethnicities, which where I live is very easy to do because they're everywhere. I'm just a boring old white guy, but European soul likes Beethoven and Mozart, that kind of stuff. But every day in my life, I interact with people from certainly non-white and certainly non-English cultures. A lot of Europeans, of course, from many, many countries. So many that you would never be able to figure out unless you were give them a questionnaire when you met them, which, of course, I'm unwilling to do. And I realize smaller communities are a little more, white bread where I am. But there's many, many, many towns and cities around the world now where the integration is proceeding apace. And as we form our new world consciousness on the planet, this is a major step. And it will continue for dozens of years, and will be resisted by certain, areas of humanity that wish to keep their tribal consciousness, that wish to keep their sense of sacredness, and hey, we're better than you. And our tradition is more closer to whatever, God or the angels or whatever. There's a lot of that, and you'll notice it even if you don't participate in it. But this sense of the consciousness, the brotherhood of all sentient beings, which I've said before, is a step beyond the brotherhood of mankind. It's an ongoing issue. Of course it is. But I'm just trying to outline the various levels that we are confronted with embracing as we expand. And we've certainly done that in this series of videos, and we will continue to do so. But it is something that I think I should and have done outlined for you, so that you can sort of feel the bigger picture for what I'm aiming for here. And again, I'll get back to the sense of, some of you will feel overwhelmed with this thing. Where am I going to have the time to do this? I am raising a family, I am working, I am repairing the house, whatever it is that you're up to. Looking after aging parents, coping with Alzheimer's, that's another issue. I understand that. I've got personal experience with it several times. I think we will find a cure for that, and it may be sort of actually quite organic and based in connections in the brain. But I realize it's a lot to cope with. I'm not suggesting that it's easy. I'm suggesting that it's ongoing, and it's a step-by-step process. And as I've gone through the step-by-step process, I find the accumulation of experiences easier to cope with. Once upon a time, as somebody once pointed out to me when my first book came out, Eternal Life and How to Enjoy It, I was quite apprehensive about blending my consciousness with higher self. I was a little shocked and not shocked, overwhelmed. And but that's not hard for me now. And so 20 years have gone by, whatever. And when I'm doing talks and videos on assisting others merging with higher self, I sense that a lot of you are still challenged and troubled by that. You don't find it easy. And you think, well, how come he finds it easy? Well, because I've been at it for a while, and I've given up a lot of my limitations and self-criticism and self-doubt. You have to realize that you're worthy of this, that you have the ability, and you are worthy, just as sinful Christians who tell me when I try to retrieve them that they're not worthy of being in heaven, and I have to go on about the unconditional love and embracing arms of Jesus Christ, which I'm quite sincere about, although it may sound I'm being a little silly. I have to go on about that and to sort of convince them that they are worthy of entering heaven despite their sins and their predilection for sinfulness, or what they perceive as sinfulness, as defined by their religion, and haven't forgiven themselves. It's the old saw: forgive yourself first before you start forgiving others. It's the same thing as far as I can tell. Souls are put up blocks to embracing higher self, out of a sense of being overwhelmed, out of a sense of being unworthy, out of a sense of being, I'm not ready for that, I can't cope with it, it's too much, all that sort of thing. It's very similar. These are psychological mechanisms that prevent us from expanding in all kinds of ways. In the old occult literature, it's called the dweller on the threshold. That's the accumulation of all your fears and doubts and angers and anxieties that have formed into, over the many incarnations, formed into a sort of thought form that sits over you and sort of prevents you from progressing and expanding. And it's a good term, the threshold of greater consciousness, and this big fat slob that sits there for, preventing you from going through. That's the dweller on the threshold. But it is the accumulation of all your earlier anxieties, fears, doubts, angers, from many hundreds of years ago. And of course, in terms of higher self or your graduated self, who you will be when you finish your incarnation, it's all quite silly. The dweller on the threshold's like a puff of smoke. But when you're confronted with that dweller on the threshold, and he's here and you're there, it's very much a. But when you're up here, having graduated, it looks not much more than a couple of rain clouds floating across the sky. That's about all. But those are the stages, and them's the odds, as they say somewhere. And we will be obviously exploring this as the summer goes on. More talk of nature spirits and contact with alien beings, extraterrestrials, if you like, and having them talk, obviously through me, to us, and a slow but continuous blending with the many sentient beings that are part of our brotherhood. And it will continue to be so. I have found, for example, that talking with the smaller, less graduated nature spirits in the garden is like talking to young children, 5-year-olds. Now, they're smarter than 5-year-olds, but they do have that sense of playfulness and fun and joy that continually interrupts any sort of, like squirrels dashing around the garden. They have that sense of playfulness and joy. It's totally part of their being. And we're all kind of sensible, making plans and, doing the usual gardening stuff, as I was doing just yesterday morning, climbing up a ladder and cutting large branches and having them collapse onto the ground, and then cutting them up and putting them in the compost pile. That's not so playful. One has to be careful. So, there is a constant enlargement of one's embrace. But do not worry that you aren't capable. You are. And there's a lot to remember, and there's a lot to be focused on other than one's sort of daily schedule of things to do. Many years ago, for example, I read in one of the early books about Findhorn, the Findhorn Garden, I think, something from the early 70s. They were working with their first printing press, or it was some piece of machinery. I just can't remember. I think that's what it was. It might have been a furnace. I can't remember. But they discovered, maybe it was Dorothy McLean, maybe it was someone else, that embracing machinery as though it was ensouled helped a lot with old machinery. And by speaking to it respectfully and trying to merge your consciousness with it and trying to see what it needed out of any certain situation, as well as what you needed, assisted in making the functioning more efficient and less prone to disasters. So I've had that attitude on and off for many, many years now, having read that. And I had this experience just the other day of talking to my partner's car. I don't have a car, but she does. And I always say hello to it when I get in and out and thank it. Or mostly, not always. And one day I was getting out of it a few days ago and said, "Thank you, car." And it said right away up here, "Why don't you call me Elizabeth?" it sounded quite genuine to me. So we've been calling her Elizabeth since. And it's an aging car, but it functions very well. And just to let you know, this process goes on all the time. And say a while ago, I found a few years ago now, 3, 4, 5, an elemental in my bedroom, and it got a little uppity, wanted me to close the door when I went out, and I'd say, okay, I'll close the door. It liked this sense of privacy, and it was, it was responsible for the room when I was gone, and it saw it's part of his responsibilities, and but sometimes it got a little pushy. And I would react and say, I'm not going to close the door. I'm going to leave it open. And not that anyone would be there while I was gone. It was a quiet house in those days. And but just to give you an example of the funny things that can happen. And this elemental in the bedroom we're now a little more balanced. And there's been other issues over the years where the house angel, who's kind of like the butler, as I said, of a large household. He kind of runs the show energetically. He doesn't go out to the garden much because the garden elemental's going to run the show out there. And there's a little bit of, shirtiness, a little bit of, this is my territory, that's yours. And they have to learn to get along. I can't force them to get along. I wouldn't say they fight, but there's a little bit of snootiness going on. And, they're out there, he's in here. And I say he because he has a sort of a masculine energy. They're not gendered beings, but they tend to have, vibrations and attitudes that suggest one gender over another. And it's all rather fun. And I encourage you all to participate. It's great fun. There certainly is a lot, and you say to yourself, how can I be yakking to aliens and dead people and elementals all the time? Yes, I know, you've got busy lives, and it's not possible. But just keep in mind as we expand, that's what we're doing, amongst other things. You're not just talking to your dead grandmother. It's a lot more than that. And sometimes in my interaction with the school system, I've been driving children to school for many years, I see principals and vice principals, and I realize the numbers of people that they have to get to know. And some of them are very good at it, remembering names and personalities and dealing with people on an individual basis, even though there's hundreds of people within their purview. And, other teachers, janitors, children, parents. And I sometimes look at them and think, oh boy, I couldn't handle that. That's way too many for me. But I recognize their ability to do such a thing. Is it God-given? Well, yes. But it's their special talent. So I see a metaphor there. I see a comparison there. We are becoming like vice principals of elementary schools, talking to hundreds of people, hundreds of souls, hundreds of sentient beings, all of whom are evolving. And with that positive note, I wish you farewell for now, and God bless, and God bless everyone else too. May your explorations be mystical, wonderful, and joyful, and mysterious too.